20. Routine. Slowly, the wildfire installation settled into a routine, a rhythm of work in the underground chambers of a laboratory, where there was no night or day, morning or afternoon. The men slept when they were tired, awoke when they were refreshed, and carried on their work in a number of different areas. Most of this work was to lead nowhere. They knew that and accepted it in advance. As Stone was fond of saying, scientific research was much like prospecting. You went out and you hunted, armed with your maps and your instruments. But in the end, your preparations did not matter, or even your intuition. You needed your luck, and whatever benefits occurred to the diligent through sheer grinding hard work. Burton stood in the room that housed the spectrometer, along with several other pieces of equipment for radioactivity assays, ratio densities, photometry, thermocoupling analysis, and preparations for X-ray crystallography. The spectrometer employed in Level 5 was the standard Whittington Model K5. Essentially, it consisted of a vaporizer, a prism, and a recording screen. The material to be tested was set in the vaporizer and burned. The light from its burning then passed through the prism, where it was broken down to a spectrum that was projected onto a recording screen. Since different elements gave off different wavelengths of light as they burned, it was possible to analyze the chemical makeup of a substance by analyzing the spectrum of light produced. In theory, it was simple, but in practice, the reading of spectrometograms was complex and difficult. No one in the wildfire laboratory was trained to do it well. Thus, results were fed directly into a computer, which performed the analysis. Because of the sensitivity of the computer, rough percentage compositions could also be determined. Burton placed the first chip from the black rock onto the vaporizer and pressed the button. There was a single bright burst of intensely hot light. He turned away, avoiding the brightness, and then put the second chip onto the lamp. Already, he knew, the computer was analyzing the light from the first chip. He repeated the process with a green fleck, and then checked the time. The computer was now scanning the self-developing photographic plates, which were ready for viewing in seconds. But the scan itself would take 2 hours. The electric eye was very slow. Once the scan was completed, the computer would analyze results and print the data within 5 seconds. The wall clock told him it was now 1500 hours, 3 in the afternoon. He suddenly realized he was tired. He punched in instructions to the computer to wake him when analysis was finished. Then he went off to bed. In another room, Levitt was carefully feeding similar chips into a different machine, an amino acid analyzer. As he did so, he smiled slightly to himself, for he could remember how it had been in the old days, before AA analysis was automatic. In the early 50s, the analysis of amino acids in a protein might take weeks or even months. Sometimes it took years. Now it took hours, or at the very most, a day, and it was fully automatic. Amino acids were the building blocks of proteins. There were 24 known amino acids, each composed of a half dozen molecules of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. Proteins were made by stringing these amino acids together in a line, like a freight train. The order of stringing determined the nature of the protein, whether it was insulin, hemoglobin, or growth hormone. All proteins were composed of the same freight cars, the same units. Some proteins had more of one kind of car than another, or in a different order, but that was the only difference. The same amino acids, the same freight cars, existed in human proteins and flea proteins. That fact had taken approximately 20 years to discover. But what controlled the order of amino acids in the protein? The answer turned out to be DNA, the genetic coding substance, which acted like a switching manager in a freight yard. That particular fact had taken another 20 years to discover. But then once the amino acids were strung together, they began to twist and coil upon themselves. The analogy became closer to a snake than a train. The manner of coiling was determined by the order of acids, and was quite specific. A protein had to be coiled in a certain way, and no other, or it failed to function. Another 10 years. Rather odd, Levitt thought. Hundreds of laboratories, thousands of workers throughout the world, all bent on discovering such essentially simple facts. It had all taken years and years, decades of patient effort. And now there was this machine. The machine would not, of course, give the precise order of amino acids, but it would give a rough percentage composition. So much valine, so much arginine, so much cysteine and protein and leucine, and that, in turn, would give a great deal of information. Yet it was a shot in the dark. This machine, because they had no reason to believe that either the rock or the green organism was composed even partially of proteins. True, every living thing on Earth had at least some proteins, but that didn't mean life elsewhere had to have it. For a moment, he tried to imagine life without proteins. It was almost impossible. On Earth, proteins were a part of the cell wall and comprise all the enzymes known to man. And life without enzymes, was that possible? He recalled the remark of George Thomson, the British biochemist, who had called enzymes the matchmakers of life. It was true. Enzymes acted as catalysts for all chemical reactions by providing a surface for two molecules to come together and react upon. There were hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of enzymes, each existing solely to aid a single chemical reaction. Without enzymes, there could be no chemical reactions. Without chemical reactions, there could be no life. Or could there? It was a long-standing problem. Early in planning wildfire, the question had been posed: how do you study a form of life totally unlike any you know? How would you even know it was alive? This was not an academic matter. Biology, as George Wald had said, was a unique science because it could not define its subject matter. Nobody had a definition for life. Nobody knew what it was, really. The old definitions, and organisms that showed indigestion, excretion, metabolism, reproductions, and so on, were worthless. One could always find exceptions. The group had finally concluded that energy conversions was the hallmark of life. All living organisms in some way took in energy as food or sunlight and converted it to another form of energy and put it to use. Viruses were the exceptions to this rule, but the group was prepared to define viruses as non-living. For the next meeting, Leavitt was asked to prepare a rebuttal to the definition. He pondered it for a week and returned with 3 objects: a swatch of black cloth, a watch, and a piece of granite. He set them down before the group and said, "Gentlemen, I give you 3 living things." He then challenged the team to prove that they were not living. He placed the black cloth in the sunlight. It became warm. This, he announced, was an example of energy conversion. Radiant energy to heat. It was objected that this was merely passive energy absorption, not conversion. It was also objected that the conversions, if it could be called that, was not purposeful. It served no function. How do you know it is not purposeful? Leavitt had demanded. They then turned to the watch. Leavitt pointed to the radium dial, which glowed in the dark. Decay was taking place, and light was being produced. The men argued that this was merely release of potential energy, held in unstable electron levels. But there was growing confusion. Leavitt was making his point. Finally, they came to the granite. "This is alive," Leavitt said. "It is living, breathing, walking, and talking. Only we cannot see it, because it is happening too slowly. Rock has a lifespan of 3 billion years. We have a lifespan of 60 or 70 years. We cannot see what is happening to this rock, for the same reason that we cannot make out the tune on a record being played at the rate of 1 revolution every century. And the rock, for its part, is not even aware of our existence, because we are alive for only a brief instance of its lifespan. To it, we are like flashes in the dark." He held up his watch. His point was clear enough, and they revised their thinking in one important respect. They conceded that it was possible that they might not be able to analyze certain life forms. it was possible that they might not be able to make the slightest headway, the least beginning in such an analysis. But Leavitt's concerns extended beyond this to the general problem of actions in uncertainty. He recalled reading Talbot Grigson's Planning the Unplanned with close attention, poring over the complex mathematical models the author had devised to analyze the problem. It was Grigson's conviction that all decisions involving uncertainty falls within two distinct categories, those with contingencies and those without. The latter are distinctly more difficult to deal with. Most decisions and nearly all human interactions can be incorporated into a contingencies model. For example, a president may start a war, a man may sell his business, or divorce his wife. Such an action will produce a reaction. The number of reactions is infinite, but the number of probable reactions is manageably small. Before making a decision, an individual can predict various reactions, and he can assess his original or primary mode. Decisions more effectively. But there is also a category which cannot be analyzed by contingencies. This category involves events and situations which are absolutely unpredictable, not merely disasters of all sorts, but those also including rare moments of discovery and insight, such as those which produced the laser or penicillin. Because these moments are unpredictable, they cannot be planned for in any logical manner. That mathematics are wholly unsatisfactory. We may only take comfort in the fact that such situations, for ill or for good, are exceedingly rare. Jeremy Stone, working with infinite patience, took a flake of the green material and dropped it into molten plastic. The plastic was the size and shape of a medicine capsule. He waited until the flake was firmly embedded and poured more plastic over it. He then transferred the plastic pill to the curing room. Stone envied the others their mechanized routines. The preparations of samples for electron microscopy was still a delicate task requiring skilled human hands. The preparations of a good sample was as demanding a craft as that ever practiced by an artisan, and took almost as long to learn. Stone had worked for 5 years before he became proficient at it. The plastic was cured in a special high-speed processing unit, but it would still take 5 hours to harden to proper consistency. The curing room would maintain a constant temperature of 61 degrees Celsius, with a relative humidity of 10%. Once the plastic was hardened, he would scrape it away and then flake off a small bit of green with a microtome. This would go into the electron microscope. The flake would have to be of the right thickness and size, a small round shaving, 1,500 angstroms in depth, no more. Only then could he look at the green stuff, whatever it was, at 60,000 diameters magnification. That, he thought, would be interesting. In general, Stone believed the work was going well. They were making fine progress, moving forward in several promising lines of inquiry. But most important, they had time. There was no rush, no panic, no need to fear. The bomb had been dropped on Piedmont. That would destroy airborne organisms and neutralize the source of infection. Wildfire was the only place that any further infections could spread from, and wildfire was specifically designed to prevent that. Should isolation be broken in the lab, the areas that were contaminated would automatically seal off. Within half a second, sliding airtight doors would close, producing a new configurations for the lab. This was necessary because past experience in other laboratories working in so-called axenic or germ-free atmospheres indicated that contaminations occurred in 15% of cases. The reasons were usually structural: a seal burst, a glove tore, a seam split, but the contaminations occurred nonetheless. At Wildfire, they were prepared for that eventuality. But if it did not happen, and the odds were it would not, then they could work safely here for an indefinite period. They could spend a month, even a year, working on the organism. There was no problem at all. Hall walked through the corridor, looking at the atomic detonator substations. He was trying to memorize their positions. There were 5 on the floor, positioned at intervals along the central corridor. Each was the same: small silver boxes no larger than a cigarette packet. Each had a lock for the key, a green light that was burning and a dark red light. Burton had explained the mechanisms earlier. There are sensors in all the duct systems and in all the labs. They monitor the air in the rooms by a variety of chemical, electronic, and straight bioassays devices. The bioassay is just a mouse whose heartbeat is being monitored. If anything goes wrong with the sensors, the lab automatically seals off. If the whole floor is contaminated, it will seal off and the atomic device will cut in. When that happens, the green light will go out and the red light will begin to blink. That signals the start of the 3-minute interval. Unless you lock in your key, the bomb will go off at the end of 3 minutes. And I have to do it myself. Burton nodded. The key is steel. It is conductive. The lock has a system which measures the capacitance of the persons holding the key. It responds to general body size, particularly weight, and also the salt content of threat. It's quite specific, actually, for you. So I'm really the only one. You really are. And you only have one key. But there's a complicating problem. The blueprints weren't followed exactly. We only discovered the error after the lab was finished and the device installed. But there is an error. We are short 3 detonator substations. There are only 5 instead of 8, meaning that if the floor starts to contaminate, you must rush to locate yourself at our substations. Otherwise, there is a chance you could be sealed off in a sector without a substations. And then in the event of malfunctions of the bacteriologic sensors, a false positive malfunction, the laboratory could be destroyed needlessly. That seems a rather serious error in planning. It turns out, Button said, that 3 new substations were going to be added next month. But that won't help us now. Just keep the problem in mind, and everything will be alright. Levitt awoke quickly, rolling out of bed and starting to dress. He was excited. He had just had an idea. A fascinating thing. Wild, crazy, but fascinating as hell. It had come from his dream. He had been dreaming of a house, and then of a city, a huge, complex, interconnecting city around the house. A man lived in the house with his family. The man lived and worked and commuted within the city, moving about, acting, reacting. And then in the dream, the city was suddenly eliminated, leaving only the house. How different things were then. A single house, standing alone, without the things it needed: water, plumbing, electricity, streets, and a family, cut off from the supermarkets, schools, drugstores, and the husband whose work was in the city, interrelated to others in the city, suddenly stranded. The house became a different organism altogether, and from that to the wildfire organism was but a single step, a single leap of the imagination. He would have to discuss it with Stone. Stone would laugh, as usual. Stone always laughed, but he would also pay attention. Levitt knew that, in a sense, he operated as the idea man for the team. The man who would always provide the most improbable, mind-stretching theories. Well, Stone would at least be interested. He glanced at the clock, 2200 hours. Getting on toward midnight, he hurried to dress. He took out a new paper suit and slipped his feet in. The paper was cool against his bare flesh. And then suddenly it was warm. A strange sensation. He finished dressing, stood, and zipped up the one-piece suit. As he left, he looked once again at the clock. 22:10. Oh Christ, he thought. It had happened again. And this time, for 10 minutes. What had gone on? He couldn't remember. But it was 10 minutes gone. Disappeared. While he had dressed. An action that shouldn't have taken more than 30 seconds. He sat down again on the bed, trying to remember, but he could not. 10 minutes gone. It was terrifying, because it was happening again, though he had hoped it would not. It hadn't happened for months, but now, with the excitement, the odd hours, the break in his normal hospital schedule, it was starting once more. For a moment, he considered telling the others, then shook his head. He'd be all right. It wouldn't happen again. He was going to be just fine. He stood. He had been on his way to see Stone, to talk to Stone, about something. Something important and exciting. He paused. He couldn't remember. The idea, the image, the excitement was gone, vanished, erased from his mind. He knew then that he should tell Stone, admit the whole thing. But he knew what Stone would say and do if he found out. And he knew what it would mean to his future, to the rest of his life. Once the wildfire project was finished, everything would change. If people knew, he couldn't ever be normal again. He would have to quit his job, do other things, make endless adjustments. He couldn't even drive a car. No, he thought. He would not say anything, and he would be all right, as long as he didn't look at blinking lights. Jeremy Stone was tired, but knew he was not ready for sleep. He paced up and down the corridors of the laboratory, thinking about the birds at Piedmont. He went over everything they had done. How they had seen the birds, how they had gassed them with chlorozine, and how the birds had died. He went over it in his mind again and again, because he was missing something, and that something was bothering him. At the time, while he had been inside Piedmont itself, it had bothered him. Then he had forgotten, but his nagging doubts had been revived at the noon conference while Hall was discussing the patients. Something Hall had said, some fact he had mentioned, was related in some off way to the birds. But what was it? What was the exact thought, the precise words that had triggered the association? Stone shook his head. He simply couldn't dig it out. The clues, the connections, the keys were all there, but he couldn't bring them to the surface. He pressed his hands to his head, squeezing it against the bones, and he damned his brain for being so stubborn. Like many intelligent men, Stone took a rather suspicious attitude toward his own brain, which he saw as a precise and skilled but temperamental machine. He was never surprised when the machine failed to perform, though he feared those moments and hated them. In his blackest hours, Stone doubted the utility of all thought and all intelligence. There were times when he envied the laboratory rats he worked with. Their brains were so simple. Certainly they did not have the intelligence to destroy themselves. That was a peculiar invention of man, He often argued that human intelligence was more trouble than it was worth. It was more destructive than creative, more confusing than revealing, more discouraging than satisfying, more spiteful than charitable. There were times when he saw man, with his giant brain, as equivalent to the dinosaurs. Every schoolboy knew that dinosaurs had outgrown themselves, had become too large and ponderous to be viable. No one ever thought to consider whether the human brain, the most complex structure in the known universe, making fantastic demands on the human bodies in terms of nourishment and blood, was not analogous. Perhaps the human brain had become a kind of dinosaur for man, and perhaps, in the end, would prove his downfall. Already, the brain consumed 1/4 of the body's blood supply. 1/4 of all blood pumped from the heart went to the brain, an organ accounting for only a small percentage of body mass. If brains grew larger and better, then perhaps they would consume more. Perhaps so much that, like an infection, they would overrun their hosts and kill the bodies that transported them. Or perhaps in their infinite cleverness, they would find a way to destroy themselves and each other. There were times when, as he sat at State Department or Defense Department meetings and looked around the table, he saw nothing more than a dozen gray, convoluted brains sitting on the table. No flesh and blood, no hands, no eyes, no fingers, no mouths, no sex organs. All these were superfluous. Just brains sitting around, trying to decide how to outwit other brains at other conference tables. Idiotic. He shook his head, thinking that he was becoming like Levitt, conjuring up wild and improbable schemes. Yet there was a sort of logical consequence to Stone's ideas. If you really feared and hated your brain, you would attempt to destroy it. Destroy your own and destroy others. "I'm tired," he said aloud, and looked at the wall clock. It was 23:40 hours. Almost time for the midnight conference. 21. The midnight conference. They met again, in the same room, in the same way. Stone glanced at the others and saw they were tired. No one, including himself, was getting enough sleep. "We're going at this too hard," he said. "We don't need to work around the clock, and we shouldn't do so. Tired men will make mistakes. Mistakes in thinking and mistakes in action. We'll start to drop things, to screw things up, to work sloppily. And we'll make wrong assumptions, draw incorrect inferences that mustn't happen." The team agreed to get at least 6 hours sleep in each 24-hour period. That seemed reasonable. Since there was no problem on the surface, the infections at Piedmont had been halted by the atomic bomb. Their belief might never have been altered had not Levitt suggested that they file for a code name. Levitt stated that they had an organism, and that it required a code. The others agreed. In a corner of the room stood the scrambler typewriter. It had been clattering all day long, typing out material sent in from the outside. It was a two-way machine. Material transmitted had to be typed in lowercase letters, while received materials was printed out in capitals. No one had really bothered to look at the input since their arrival on level 5. They were all too busy. Besides, most of the input had been routine military dispatches that were sent to Wildfire but did not concern it. This was because Wildfire was one of the cooler circuit substations, known facetiously as the Top 20. These substations were linked to the basement of the White House and were the 20 most important strategic locations in the country. Other substations included Vandenberg, Kennedy, NORAD, Patterson's, Dietrich, and Virginia Key. Stone went to the typewriter and printed out his message. The message was directed by computer to Central Codes, a station that handled the coding of all projects subsumed under the systems of Kula. The transmissions was as followed. Open line to transmit. Understand transmit state origin. Stone Project Wildfire. State destinations. Central Codes. Understand Central Codes. Message follows. Send. Have isolated extraterrestrial organisms secondary to return of Scoop 7, which coding for organisms end message transmitted. There followed a long pause. The scrambler teleprinter hummed and clicked, but printed nothing. Then the typewriter began to spit out a message on a long roll of paper. Message from Central Codes follows. Understand isolations of new organisms, please. Characterize. End message. Stone frowned. But we don't know enough. However, the teleprinter was impatient. Transmit reply to Central Codes. After a moment, Stone typed back. Message to Central Codes follows. Cannot characterize at this time, but suggest tentative classifications as bacterial strain. End message. Message from Central Codes follows. Understand request for bacterial classification. Opening new category classifications according to ICTA standard reference. Code for your organisms will be Andromeda. Code. We'll read out Andromeda strain. Filed under ICTA listings as O53.9. Unspecified organism. Further findings as E866. Aircraft accident. This failing represents closest fit to established categories. Stone smiled. It seems we don't fit the established categories. He typed back. Understand the coding as Andromeda strain accepted. End message transmitted. Well, Stone said, that's that. Burton had been looking over the sheaves of paper behind the teleprinter. The teleprinter wrote its messages out on a long roll of paper, which fell into a box. There were dozens of yards of paper that no one had looked at. Silently he read a single message, tore it from the rest of the strip and handed it to Stone. 1134-443-KK-YU-9. Information status. Transmit to all stations. Classification top secret. Request for Directive 712 received today by Exec and NSC Cobra. Origin Vandenberg wildfire. Corroborations NASA AMC. Authority primary man check. Author Major USA. In closed sessions, this directive has not been acted upon. Final decisions has been postponed 24 to 48 hours. Reconsideration at that time alternative troop deployment according to Directive 711 now in effect. No notifications and message. Transmit all stations. Classifications top secret. End transmission. The team stared at the message in disbelief. No one said anything for a long time. Finally, Stone ran his fingers along the upper corner of the sheet and said in a low voice, "This was a 443. That makes it an MCN transmission. It should have rung the bell down here." "There's no bell on this teleprinter," Levitt said. "Only on level 1, at Sector 5. But they're supposed to notify us whenever." "Get Sector 5 on the intercom," Stone said. 10 minutes later, the horrified Sergeant Morris had connected Stone to Robertson, the head of the President's Science Advisory Committee, who was in Houston. Stone spoke for several minutes with Robertson, who expressed initial surprise that he hadn't heard from Wildfire earlier. There then followed a heated discussion of the President's decisions not to call a Directive 712. "The President doesn't trust scientists," Robertson said. "He doesn't feel comfortable with them." "It's your job to make him comfortable," Stone said. "And you haven't been doing it." "Jeremy, there are only 2 sources of contamination," Stone said. "Piedmont and this installation. We're adequately protected here, but Piedmont. Jeremy, I agree the bomb should have been dropped. Then work on him. Stay on his back. Get him to call a 712 as soon as possible. It may already be too late." Robertson said he would, and would call back. Before he hung up, he said, "By the way, any thoughts about the Phantom?" "The what?" "The Phantom that crashed in Utah." There was a moment of confusion before the Wildfire group understood that they had missed still another important teleprinter message. Routine training mission? The jet strayed over the closed zone, though. That's the puzzle. Any other information? The pilot said something about his ear hose dissolving. Vibrations or something. His last communications was pretty bizarre. "Like he was crazy?" Stern asked. "Like that," Robertson said. "Is there a team at the wreck site now?" "Yes. We are waiting for information from them. It could come at any time." "Pass it along," Stone said, and then he stopped. "If a 711 was ordered instead of a 712, he said, "then you have troops in the area around Piedmont. National Guard? Yes." "That's pretty damn stupid," Stone said. Look, Jeremy, I agree. When the first one dies, Stone said, I want to know when and how, and most especially where. The wind there is from the east predominantly. If you start losing men west of Piedmont, I'll call Jeremy, Robertson said. The conversations ended, and the team shuffled out of the conference room. Hall remained behind a moment, going through some of the rules in the box, noting the messages. The majority were unintelligible to him. A weird set of nonsense messages and codes. After a time, he gave up. He did so before he came upon the reprinted news item concerning the peculiar death of Officer Martin Willis of the Arizona Highway Patrol. Day 4. Spread. 22. The analysis. With the new pressures of time, the results of spectrometry and amino acids analysis, previously or of peripheral interest, suddenly became matters of major concern. It was hoped that these analyses would tell, in a rough way, how foreign the Andromeda's organism was to Earth life forms. It was thus with interest that Levitt and Burton looked over the computer printout, a column of figures written on green paper. Mass spectrometry data output print, percentage output sample, black object unidentified origin. 31070, Liebig sample 2, green object unidentified origin, HHC 2700. All heavier metals show zero content, and print, and the program stop. What all this meant was simple enough. The black rock contained hydrogen, carbon, and oxygen, with significant amounts of sulfur, silicon, and selenium, and with trace quantities of several other elements. The green spot, on the other hand, contained hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen. Nothing else at all. The two men found it peculiar that the rock and the green spot should be so similar in chemical makeup, and it was peculiar that the green spot should contain nitrogen, while the rock contained none at all. The conclusion was obvious. The black rock was not rock at all, but some kind of material similar to earthly organic life. It was something akin to plastic. And the green spot, presumably alive, was composed of elements in roughly the same proportions as Earth life. On Earth, these same four elements, hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen, accounted for 99% of all the elements in life organisms. The men were encouraged by these results, which suggested similarity between the green spot and life on Earth. Their hopes were, however, short-lived. As they turned to the amino acid analysis data output, print, Sample 1, black object unidentified origin. Sample 2, green object unidentified origin. Sample 1, Sample 2, neutral amino acids, glycine 00.0000.00, alanine 00.0000.00, valine 00.0000.00, isoleucine 00.0000.00, serine 00.0000.00, threonine 0.000000. Leucine 0.000000. Aromatic amino acids phenylalanine 0.000000. Tyrosine 0.000000. Tryptophan 0.000000. Sulfuric amino acids cysteine 0.000000. Cysteine 0.000000. Methionine 0.000000. Secondary amino acids proline 0.000000. Hydroxyproline 0.000000. DNA. Aspartic acid 0.00. No, dicarboxylic amino acids. Aspartic acid 0.000000. Glutamic acid 0.000000. Basic amino acids. Histidine 0.000000. Arginine 0.000000. Lysine 0.000000. Hydroxylysine 0.000000. Total amino acid content 0.000000. End print and program. Stop. Chrysler said, staring at the printed sheet. Will you look at that? No amino acids, Burton said. No proteins. Life without proteins, Levitt said. He shook his head. It seemed as if his worst fears were realized. On Earth, organisms had evolved by learning to carry out biochemical reactions in a small space with the help of protein enzymes. Biochemists were now learning to duplicate these reactions, but only by isolating a single reaction from all others. Living cells were different. They were within a small area. Reactions were carried out that provided energy, growth, and movement. There was no separations, and man could not duplicate this any more than a man could prepare a complete dinner from appetizers to dessert by mixing together the ingredients for everything into a single large dish, cooking it and hoping to separate the apple pie from the cheese dip later on. Cells could keep the hundreds of separate reactions straight using enzymes. Each enzyme was like a single worker in a kitchen, doing just one thing. Thus a baker could not make a steak any more than a steak griller could use his equipment to prepare appetizers. But enzymes had a further use. They made possible chemical reactions that otherwise would not occur. A biochemist could duplicate the reactions by using great heat, or great pressure, or strong acids. But the human body or the individual cell could not tolerate such extreme of environment. Enzymes, the matchmakers of life, helped chemical reactions to go forward at body temperatures and atmospheric pressures. Enzymes were essential to life on Earth. but if another form of life had learned to do without them, it must have evolved in a wholly different way. Therefore, they were dealing with an entirely alien organism. And this in turn meant that analysis and neutralization would take much, much longer. In the room marked Morphology, Jeremy Stone removed the small plastic capsule in which the green fleck had been embedded. He set the now harder capsule into the vise, fixing it firmly, and then took a dental drill to it, shaving away the plastic until he exposed bare green material. This was a delicate process, requiring many minutes of concentrated work. At the end of that time, he had shaped the plastic in such a way that he had a pyramid of plastic, with the green fleck at the peak of the pyramid. He unscrewed the vise and lifted the plastic out. He took it to the microtome, a knife with a revolving blade that cut very thin slices of plastic, and embedded the green tissue. These slices were round. They fell from the plastic block into a dish of water. The thickness of the slice could be measured by looking at the light as it reflected off the slices. If the light was faint silver, the slice was too thick. If, on the other hand, it was a rainbow of colors, then it was the right thickness, just a few molecules in depth. That was how thick they wanted a slice of tissue to be for the electron microscope. When Stone had a suitable piece of tissue, he lifted it carefully with forceps and set it onto a small round copper grid. This in turn was inserted into a metal button. Finally, the button was set into the electron microscope, and the microscope sealed shut. The electron microscope used by Wildfire was the BVJ model JJ42. It was a high-intensity model with an image resolutions attachment. In principle, the electron microscope was simple enough. It looked exactly like a light microscope, but instead of focusing light rays, it focused an electron beam. Light is focused by lengths of curved glass. Electrons are focused by magnetic fields. In many respects, the EM was not a great deal different from television, and in fact, the image was displayed on a television screen, a coated surface that glowed when electrons struck it. The great advantage of the electron microscope was that it could magnify objects far more than the light microscope. The reason for this had to do with quantum mechanics and the waveform theory of radiation. The best simple explanation had come from the electron microscopist Sidney Poulton, also a racing enthusiast. Assume, Poulton said, that you have a road with a sharp corner. Now assume that you have two automobiles, a sports car and a large truck. When the truck tries to go around the corner, it slips off the road, but the sports car manages it easily. Why? The sports car is lighter and smaller and faster. It is better suited to tight, sharp curves. On large, gentle curves, the automobiles will perform equally well, but on sharp curves, the sports car will do better. In the same way, an electron microscope will hold the road better than a light microscope. All objects are made of corners and edges. The electron wavelength is smaller than the quantum of light. It cuts the corners closer, follows the road better, and outlines it more precisely. With a light microscope like a truck, you can follow only a large road. In microscopic terms, this means only a large object with large edges and gentle curves, cells and nuclei. But an electron microscope can follow all the minor routes, the biroads, and can outline very small structures within the cell. Mitochondria, ribosomes, membranes, reticula. In actual practice, there were several drawbacks to the electron microscope, which counterbalanced its great powers of magnification. For one thing, because it used electrons instead of light, the inside of the microscope had to be a vacuum. This meant it was impossible to examine living creatures. But the most serious drawback had to do with the sections of specimen. These were extremely thin, making it difficult to get a good three-dimensional concept of the object under study. Again, Polton had a simple analogy. Let us say you cut an automobile in half down the middle. In that case, you could guess the complete whole structure. But if you cut a very thin slice from the automobile, and if you cut it on a strange angle, it could be more difficult. In your slice, you might have only a bit of a bumper, and rubber tire, and glass. From such a slice, it would be hard to guess the shape and function of the full structure. Stone was aware of all the drawbacks as he fitted the metal button into the EM, sealed it shut, and started the vacuum pump. He knew the drawbacks and he ignored them, because he had no choice. Limited as it was, the electron microscope was the only available high-power tool. He turned down the room lights and clicked on the beam. He adjusted several dials to focus the beam. In a moment, the image came into focus. Green and black on the screen. It was incredible. Jeremy Stone found himself staring at a single unit of the organism. It was a perfect six-sided hexagon, and it interlocked with other hexagons on each side. The interior of the hexagon was divided into ridges, each meeting at the precise center of the structure. The overall appearance was accurate with the kind of mathematical precision he did not associate with life on Earth. It looked like a crystal. He smiled. Levitt would be pleased. Levitt liked spectacular, mind-stretching things. Levitt had also frequently considered the possibility that life might be based upon crystals of some kind, that it might be ordered in some regular pattern. He decided to call Levitt in. As soon as he arrived, Levitt said, "Well, there's our answer." Answer to what? Early sketch by Jeremy Stone of hexagonal Andromeda configurations. Photo courtesy Project Wildfire. To how this organism functions. I've seen the results in spectrometry and amino acids analysis, and The organism is made of hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, and nitrogen, but it has no amino acids at all, none, which means that it has no proteins as we know them, and no enzymes. I was wondering how it could survive without protein-based organization. Now I know. The crystalline structure. Looks like it. Levitt said, peering at the screen. In 3 dimensions. It's probably a hexagonal slab, like a piece of tile, 8-sided with each face of a hexagon. And on the inside, those wedge-shaped compartments leading to the center. They would serve to separate biochemical functions quite well. Yes, that said. He frowned. Something the matter? Lever was thinking, remembering something he had forgotten. A dream about a house and a city. He thought for a moment, and it began to come back to him. A house and a city. The way the house worked alone, and the way it worked in a city. It all came back. You know, he said. It's interesting the way this one unit interlocks with the others around it. You're wondering if we are seeing part of a higher organisms? Exactly. Is this unit self-sufficient, like a bacterium? Or is it just a block from a larger organ? Or a larger organism? After all, if you saw a single liver cell, could you guess what kind of an organ it came from? No. And what good would one brain cell be without the rest of the brain? Stone stared at the screen for a long time. A rather unusual pair of analogies. Because the liver can regenerate, can grow back, but the brain cannot. Levitt smiled. The messenger theory. One wonders, Stone said. The messenger's theory had come from John R. Samuels, a communications engineer, speaking before the 5th Annual Conference on Astronautics and Communications. He had reviewed some theories about the way in which an alien culture might choose to contact other cultures. He argued that the most advanced concepts in communications and Earth technology were inadequate, and that advanced cultures would find better methods. Let us say a culture wishes to scan the universe, he said. Let us say they wish to have a sort of coming out party on a galactic scale to formally announce their existence. They wish to spew out information, clues to their existence, in every directions. What is the best way to do this? Radio? Hardly. Radio is too slow, too expensive, and it decays too rapidly. Strong signals reaching within a few billion miles. TV is even worse. Light rays are fantastically expensive to generate. Even if one learned a way to detonate whole stars, to explode a sun as a kind of signal, it would be costly. Besides expense, all these methods suffer the traditional drawback to any radiation, namely decreasing strength with distance. A light bulb may be unbearably bright at 10 feet. It may be powerful at 1,000 feet. It may be visible at 10 miles. But at 1,000,000 miles, it is completely obscure. Because radiant energy decreases according to the 4th power of the radius. a simple, unbeatable law of physics. So, you do not use physics to carry your signal. You use biology. You create a communication system that does not diminish with distance, but rather remains as powerful a million miles away as it was at the source. In short, you devise an organism to carry your message. The organisms would be self-replicating, cheap, and could be produced in fantastic numbers. For a few dollars, you could produce trillions of them and send them off in all directions into space. They would be tough, hardy bugs, able to withstand the rigors of space, and they would grow and duplicate and divide within a few years. There would be countless numbers of these in the galaxies, speeding in all directions, waiting to contact life. And when they did, each single organism would carry the potential to develop into a full organ, or a full organisms. They would, upon contacting life, begin to grow into a complete communicating mechanisms. It is like spewing out 1 billion brain cells, each capable of regrowing a complete brain under the proper circumstances. The newly grown brain would then speak to the new culture, informing it of the presence of the other and announcing ways in which contact might be made. Samuel's theory of the messenger bug was considered amusing by practical scientists, but it could not be discounted now. Do you suppose, Stone said, that it is already developing into some kind of organ of communications? Perhaps the cultures will tell us more, Levitt said. Or X-ray crystallography, Stone said. I'll order it now. Level 5 had facilities for X-ray crystallography, though there had been much heated discussions during wildfire planning as to whether such facilities were necessary. X-ray crystallography represented the most advanced, complex, and expensive method of structural analysis in modern biology. It was a little like electron microscopy, but one step further along the line. It was more sensitive and could probe deeper, but only at great cost in terms of time, equipment, and personnel. The biologist R.A. Janik has said that increasing vision is increasingly expensive. He meant by this that any machine to enable men to see finer and fainter details increase in cost faster than it increased in resolving power. This hard fact of research was discovered first by the astronomers, who learned painfully that constructions of a 200-inch telescope mirror was far more difficult and expensive than constructing of a 100-inch mirror. In biology, this was equally true. A light microscope, for example, was a small device, easily carried by a technician in one hand. It could outline a cell, and for this ability, a scientist paid about $1,000. An electron microscope could outline small structures within the cell. The EM was a large console and cost up to $100,000. In contrast, X-ray crystallography could outline individual molecules. It came as close to photographing atoms as science could manage, but the device was the size of a large automobile. Filled an entire room, required specially trained operators, and demanded a computer for interpretations of results. This was because X-ray crystallography did not produce a direct visual pictures of the object being studied. It was not, in this sense, a microscope, and it operated differently from either the light or electron microscope. It produced a diffraction pattern instead of an image. This appeared as a pattern of geometric dots, in itself rather mysterious, on a photographic plate. By using a computer, the pattern of dots could be analyzed and the structure deduced. It was a relatively new science, retaining an old-fashioned name. Crystals were seldom used anymore. The term X-ray crystallography dated from the days when crystals were chosen as test objects. Crystals had regular structures, and thus the pattern of dots resulting from a beam of X-rays shot at crystals were easier to analyze. But in recent years, the X-rays had been shot at irregular objects of varying sorts. The X-rays were bounced off at different angles. A computer could read the photographic plate and measures the angles, and from this work back to the shape of the object that had caused such a reflection. The computer at Wildfire performed the endless and tedious calculations. All this, if done by manual human calculations, would take years, perhaps centuries. But the computer could do it in seconds. "How are you feeling, Mr. Jacksons?" Hall asked. The old man blinked his eyes and looked at Hall in his plastic suit. "All right, not the best, but all right." He gave a wry grin. "Up to talking a little? About what? Piedmont? What about it?" "That night," Hall said. "The night it all happened. Well, I tell you, I lived in Piedmont all my life. Traveled a bit. Been to L.A., and even up to Frisco. Went as far east as St. Louis, which was far enough for me. But Piedmont, that's where I lived. And I have to tell you..." "The night it all happened," Hall repeated. He stopped and turned his head away. I don't want to think about it," he said. "You have to think about it. No." He continued to look away for a moment, and then turned back to Hall. "They all died, did they?" "Not all. One other survived." He nodded to the crib next to Jackson's. Jackson's peered over at the bundle of blankets. "Who's that? A baby?" "Baby? Must be the Ritter child. Jamie Ritter. Real young, is it?" "About 2 months." "Yep, that's him. A real little heller. Just like the old man. Old Ritter likes to kick up a storm. And his kids the same way. Squalling morning, noon, and night. Family couldn't keep the windows open on account of the squalling." "Is there anything else unusual about Jamie?" "Nope. Healthy as a water buffalo. Except he squalls. I remember he was squalling like the dickens that night." Hall said, "What night?" "The night Charlie Thomas brought the damn thing in. We all seen it, of course. It came down like one of them shooting stars, all glowing, and landed just to the north. Everybody was excited, and Charlie Thomas went off to get it. Came back about 20 minutes later with the thing in the back of his Ford station wagon. Brand new wagon. He's real proud of it. Then what happened? Well, we all gathered around, looking at it. Reckoned it must be one of those space things. Annie figured it was from Mars. But you know how Annie is. Lets her mind carry her off at times. The rest of us, we didn't feel it was no Martian thing. We just figured it was something sent up from Cape Canaveral. You know that place in Florida, where they shoot the rockets. Yes, go on. So once we figured that out good and proper, we didn't know what to do. Nothing like that ever happened in Piedmont. You know, I mean, once we had that tourist with a gun shot up the Comanche Chief Motel. But that was back in 48, and besides, it was just a GI had a little too much to drink, and they were exterminating circumstances. His gal ran out on him while he was in Germany or some damn place. Nobody gave him a bad time. We understood how it was, but nothing happened since really. Quiet down, that's why we like it, I reckon. What did you do with the capsule? Well, we didn't know what to do with it. He said open it up. But we didn't figure that was right, especially since it might have some scientific stuff inside. So we thought a while. And then Charlie, who got it in the first place, Charlie says, let's give it to Doc. That's Doc Benedict. He's the downtown doctor. Actually, he takes care of everybody around, even the Indians. But he's a good fella anyhow. And he's been to lots of schools. Got these degrees on the walls. Well, we figured Doc Benedict would know what to do with the thing. So we brought it to him, and then old Doc Benedict, he's not so old actually. He looks her over real careful, like it was his patient. And then he allows how it might be a thing from space, and it might be one of ours, or it might be one of theirs. And he says he'll take care of it, and maybe make a few phone calls, and let everybody know in a few hours. See, Doc always played poker Monday nights with Charlie and Al, and Herb Johnstone over at Herb's place, and we figured that he'd spread the word around then. Besides, it was getting on supper time, and most of us were a bit hungry, so we all kind of left it with Doc. When was that? About 7:30 or so. What did Benedict do with the satellite? Took it inside his house. None of us saw it again. It was about 8:30 that it all started up. You see, I was over at the gas station having a chat with Al, who was working the pump that night. Chilly night, but I wanted to chat to take my mind off the pain, and to get some soda from the machine to wash down the aspirin with. Also, I was thirsty. Squeeze makes you right thirsty, you know. You'd been drinking Sterno that day? About 6 o'clock I had some. Yes. How did you feel? Well, when I was with Al, I felt good. A little dizzy, and my stomach was paining me. But I felt good. And Al and me were sitting inside the office, talking, and suddenly he shouts, "Oh God, my head!" He ups and runs outside and falls down. Right there in the street, not a word from him. Well, I didn't know what to make of it. I feared he had a heart attack or a shock, but he was pretty young for that. So I went after him. Only he was dead then. They all started coming out. I believe Mrs. Langdon, the widow Langdon, was next. After that, I don't recall. There were so many of them, just pouring outside. It seemed like, and they just grabbed their chests and fall, like they slipped. Only they wouldn't get up afterward. And never a word from any of them. What did you think? I didn't know what to think. It was so damned peculiar. I was scared. I don't mind telling you, but I tried to stay calm. I couldn't, naturally. My old heart was thumping, and I was wheezing and gasping. I was scared. I thought everybody was dead. Then I heard the baby crying, so I knew not everybody could be dead. And then I saw the general. The general? Oh, we just call him that. He wasn't no general, just been in the war, and like to be remembered. Older than me, he is. Nice fella. Peter Arnold, steady as a rock all his life. And he's standing by the porch, all got up in his military clothes. It's dark, but there's a moon, and he sees me in the street, and he says, "That you, Peter? We both got the same name, see?" And I says, "Yes, it is." And he says, "What the hell's happening? Japs coming in?" And I think that's a mighty peculiar thing for him to be saying. And he says, "I think it must be the Japs, come to kill us all." And then I say, "Peter, you gone loco." And he says he don't feel too good, and he goes inside. Course he must have gone loco, 'cause he shot himself. But others went loco too. It was the disease. How do you know? People don't burn themselves or drown themselves if they got sense, do they? All of them in that town were good, normal folks until that night. Then they just seemed to go crazy. What did you do? I thought to myself, "Peter, you're dreaming. You had too much to drink." So I went home and got into bed and figured I'd be better in the morning. Only about 10 o'clock I hear a noise, and it's a car. So I go outside to see what it is. It's some kind of car, one of those vans. 2 fellows inside. I go up to them, and damn, but they don't fall over dead. Scariest thing you ever saw, but it's funny. What's funny? That was the only other car to come through all night. Normally there's lots of cars. There was another car. Yep, Willis, the highway patrol. He came through often. He came through about 30 seconds before it all started. Didn't stop, though. Sometimes he doesn't. Depends if he's late on his schedule. He's got a regular patrol, He has to stick to it. Checks inside. And let his head fall back against the pillow. "Now," he said, "if you don't mind, I'm going to get me some sleep. I'm all talked out." He closed his eyes. Hall crawled back down the tunnel, out of the unit, and sat in the room, looking through the glass at Jackson and the baby in the crib alongside. He stayed there, just looking for a long time.